and welcome. You're watching this special broadcast, India at G7, anchoring multipolar world order. I'm Sakal Bhatt. In the next 1 hour, we will not only decode the big deliverables and the overarching agenda as far as G7 is concerned, but most particularly and importantly, what India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, brings to the high table of G7, representing the voice of the global south and much more. We will be also joined by our DD India senior correspondent Shubhendu Ghosh live from Evian, as also we will be joined by a special panel of experts to talk about India at G7 and G7 overarching agenda, as I just mentioned, specific context, the current global turmoil and much more. So let's begin. So on the second of his visit to Evian, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a packed schedule of diplomatic engagements, with the first one being the G7 Plus Outreach Working Meeting, which will take place from some time from now, which facilitates dialogue between the group of 7 nations and key international partners. The topic of the session is reviving balanced, inclusive and sustainable economic growth for the benefit of all. Following which, Prime Minister will be holding bilateral meeting with President of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen. The meeting comes in the backdrop of the India-EU Free Trade Agreement that concluded in January 2026. Dubbed as the mother of all deals, the pact creates a free trade zone spanning a combined market of 2 billion people, representing about a quarter of global GDP. It eliminates duties on nearly 99.5% of the Indian exports by trade value. Also later, Prime Minister will be holding bilateral meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who two leaders last held a key bilateral meeting during Merz's official visit to India on January 12th and 13th. And later comes the most important meeting of the day. That's Prime Minister Modi's bilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump. West Asia crises, energy partnership, trade deal are expected to be on the agenda during the talks as the two leaders meet today. This will be their first face-to-face interaction since their February 2025 talks. After his engagement, Prime Minister Modi will leave for Paris, which marks the last leg of his Europe visit. Also, leaders of the group of 7 G7 nations on Wednesday signed a joint declaration welcoming the peace deal between the US and Iran and reaffirmed their support for Ukraine. On Ukraine, the G7 leaders extended unwavering support for Ukraine's freedom, sovereignty and territorial integrity, while condemning attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure and cultural heritage. The members also praised Ukraine's resilience and battlefield progress and asserted that there is new momentum in support of Ukraine. Well, that was on Ukraine, and now shifting focus to West Asia crisis, the operative portion of the declaration. The G7 leaders welcomed the US-Iran agreement announced under President Trump, saying the deal offers a historic opportunity to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. They added that the deal aims to address concerns over Iran's regional and ballistic activities. G7 nations also pledged support for implementation of the agreement. Furthermore, on Indo-Pacific, G7 leaders reaffirmed commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific based on rule of law. They said that they oppose unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or by coercion, while expressing concern over tensions in East and South China Seas and Taiwan Strait. Leaders stressed that disputes must be resolved peacefully through dialogue. While G7 leaders' declaration on drug trafficking focused on strengthening maritime and port security to curb drug trafficking and countering criminal infiltration of public and private institutions. They also extended support towards international efforts against drug production and transport networks. All right. Besides on the drug trafficking, they spoke about enhancing measures to reduce drug demand and related social harms, enhancing measures to reduce drug demand and cracking down on transnational organized crime and illicit financial flows. G7 declaration on drug trafficking also talks about reaffirming commitment to preventing and combating migrant smuggling. A very important aspect there, targeting organized criminal networks involved in smuggling and human trafficking. Part of the migrant smuggling declaration they sought to dismantle criminal business models profiting from these illegal migration. Strongly worded G7 leaders on tackling migrant smuggling. Besides that, building on commitments made at 2024 Apulia and 2025 G7 summit, building on the commitments made in the previous two editions of the G7, was also in continuation of that. The G7 leaders discussed that as well, that those promises need to be kept as well. Declaration was backed by Kenya and South Korea, the two outreach nations. Remember, there are more than 5 outreach nations invited by the French presidency, and this declaration has been backed by Kenya and South Korea. We'll get you the details on the other outreach nations as we stay with these graphic plates. Let's quickly go live across to DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh from Ivan to tell us more about India at the high table as far as today is concerned. And it is important today because there's going to be some talk on the real agenda, the business, especially the outreach nations, including India, will get to make their point. So a collective strength again on the table today. What is expected, Shubhendu? Put it in perspective for us, especially India at G7.
For Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Sakal, it's going to be day 2 of participation in the G7. Today, the first session, which takes place about an hour from now, local time, is going to be focusing on sustainable economic development. And all the prominent members, leaders present here, the G7 leaders, the leaders of the partner countries, international organizations such as the IMF, World Bank, they will all come together to formulate a sort of roadmap ahead to deal with the current geopolitical challenges, particularly in the economic domain, also concerning energy. There are also very key bilaterals for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There is going to be a bilateral with the European Union leader, Ursula von der Leyen. Also the leader from Germany, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, but perhaps the bilateral that all eyes are going to be will be between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump, not just for the kind of past that the two nations represent. It's been some time since the two leaders have met in person. This was February last year, 2025, when the leaders last met in person in the White House in the United States. And ever since, the communication channels, of course, have been on, but the in-person meeting somehow has eluded the leaders. And this is an opportunity for important catching up. We know in geopolitics, in-person meetings carry a significant heft. There are a host of issues in focus. We're looking at the trade deal between India and the United States, the manner in which negotiations could be taken forward, the differences could be ironed out. There are also, of course, concerns around the West Asia development and the manner in which it is likely to be resolved. There is an opportunity for peace that is going to take place in the negotiations, and the final signing will take place in Switzerland, of course, on the 19th of June. But the manner in which it sort of impacts the global south, it impacts India's energy concerns, those are going to be in focus. Another aspect is that India is also reorienting its energy supply chains, the manner in which United States and Venezuela are coming in as important suppliers of the future. Some issues really high on priority for Prime Minister Modi to engage with today at G7.
Yes. A bit more on the bilaterals, because that is something which will take center stage. And you rightly pointed out that bilateral meeting with President Trump. But before that, just help us understand, Shubhendu, with Ursula von der Leyen, this is very important considering Prime Minister, in fact, has in the previous, latest past spoken about how India is looking at expediting FTA, and with Ursula von der Leyen dubbing it as the mother of all agreements. I think it was just recently when Prime Minister was on the five-nation tour, right? Norway,
Yes.
etc. So in that
Yes.
sense of term, when the two leaders come face to face again,
Yeah,
we expect
absolutely.
some good traction to this whole FTA narrative.
Oh, absolutely. India's engagement with the European Union, with Europe. Remember, this G7 is taking place in France. Earlier, Prime Minister had a very fruitful meeting with the leader of France, and now we're looking at the European Union leader, Ursula von der Leyen. And the manner in which it could shape, the framework, of course, is ready of the free trade agreement between India and the European Union. But the fine prints, that's where the role of the leaders really comes in to clear out the fine prints, to remove the creases in the deal, to share each other's concerns, understand and then reciprocate. Those are the things that the leaders could do when they meet in person. These are, of course, not very detailed bilateral delegation level meetings. However, the opportunity to talk does give an opportunity, give a chance, give some time to the leaders to really give a direction to these very important negotiations that are taking place in the domain of free trade agreements. So G7 focusing on the larger geopolitics and economic concerns, and India's priorities as far as those breakthrough FTAs are concerned, Sakal,
Right.
You rightly mentioned, with European Union and also with the United States.
Okay. Also, a little bit more on President Trump meeting Prime Minister Modi. We don't want to jump the gun. We don't want to speculate.
Sure.
But the body
Yes.
language yesterday at the inaugural session was very friendly. As far as President Trump is concerned, he seems to be navigating, in fact, a lot of precarious conversations which he cannot avoid. But there is one country, India, which is respected hugely, and the diplomatic heft that you rightly pointed
Yes.
out, Prime Minister Modi brings to the table. There is a bit of a pressure on Trump as far as fructifying this deal is concerned. He has to walk the talk on 19th.
Yes.
What's the sense that you are getting as far as this bilateral and in general, bridging the gap between Europe and US there is concerned?
Right, Sakal. And let me just respond to you. And before that, may I request that after this, I may have to move for
Sure.
important coverage.
You can be very brief, of course.
Yes,
please.
yes. So hugely significant. The opportunity, the possibility of peace between Iran and the United States has really charged up the atmosphere here. India in its bilateral would also be looking at the developments in West Asia. What are the possibilities? India has been pushing for peace in the region for the benefit of all stakeholders. But the challenge is that there are too many moving parts as far as the West Asia conflict is concerned. There is, of course, within the larger conflict of Iran and the United States, there is also the Lebanon and Israel conflict that is underway, and the manner in which it could sort of off-track the peace efforts as far as Iran-US peace deal is concerned. So that challenge remains. We still do not know the fine print of the peace deal. What happens to Iran's nuclear ambitions? Will it agree in terms the manner in which America wants to completely end any nuclear ambitions that Iran might have in the future? Between India and the United States, of course, given that there's so many issues, there are also issues of security and mutual trust. Remember, Prime Minister in his intervention yesterday made a very vital point about trust, and also quoting former US President Reagan, he said, trust but verify. So the changing contours of trust in international politics is also something that Prime Minister highlighted. He spoke about the need to restore trust, address trust deficit in international relations, and that lies at the heart of all ties, whether at the bilateral level or multilateral levels, because from there, all the other aspects, whether it's economic engagement and free trade agreement, whether it is security of seafarers in the Strait of Hormuz and elsewhere, all those themes are closely connected with that. So it'll be interesting to note the manner, both the leaders, of course, have great amount of respect for one another. They're very friendly towards one another. There's a great deal of optimism that the two leaders share about the partnership between India and the United States. But as they say, proof of the pudding lies in eating. We really will have to wait and watch to know what were finally the limited time that the leaders have. What are the issues among all the ones that we're talking about that the leaders are able to talk about and take forward? The crucial bilateral meeting between India and the United States.
Yes,
Sakal.
and overall, India's participation this time, experts view that is going to be highly consequential, and it's not just a role confined to being a mere outreach invitee or a guest, or it's going to be a voice of concern and voice that matters. Shubhendu, many thanks. Of course, you can go back to your exclusives that you will be getting us in a while from now. Thank you very much for joining us from Evian in France. Thank you. And Shubhendu just mentioned about how Prime Minister Modi attended the outreach session yesterday. He gave us a perspective as to what transpired in that session yesterday, during which Prime Minister observed that trust deficit between nations was at the heart of the geopolitical crises facing the world. In fact, Prime Minister pushed for a humanity-first approach. His remarks highlighted the significance of India's role and vision in the G7 summit. Here's a report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is participating in the G7 summit underway in Evian-les-Bains in France. On Tuesday, during a session on forging new partnerships and rebuilding international solidarity, PM Modi articulated the current challenges facing the world, India's message, and the concerns of the global south. PM Modi said, "In an uncertain world, trade and technology were being misused for narrow interests, leading to a trust deficit in the international arena." Alluding to lessons from the COVID pandemic, he called upon nations to focus on building trust and transparency in global partnerships. Sharing India's approach to international cooperation, Prime Minister stated that India has always followed the principle of humanity first. PM noted that international partnerships should move beyond the donor-recipient paradigm to one of solidarity and equal partnership. He also stated that lack of respect for international law was the biggest hurdle to building international solidarity. Experts of international affairs say India's role in the extended G7 grouping is indispensable given its growing stature and influence on the global stage.
The G7 cannot discuss global governance without India. India is the world's most populous country. It's a major economy. It's a democracy. It's a key Indo-Pacific power. It's really part of all the Indo-Pacific strategies of all these powers that are meeting at the G7. And it's a very influential voice in the global south, notably in the context of its hosting the G20 in September 2023. So along with India, there was also Brazil, South Korea, and Kenya, this year, but India really plays an important role because it bridges a little bit the advanced economies, developing countries, and India is a bit of a hedger in the sense that it's also part of the BRICS expanded coalition, it's part of the Quad, it's part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So it's part of all these different summits, organizations, and it can bring some input, some voices out from the global south, from these other organizations into the debates happening at the G7.
On Wednesday, the concluding day of the G7 summit, Prime Minister Modi will participate in more sessions involving the G7 leaders, partner countries, and other international participants, besides key bilateral engagements. Shubhendu Ghosh, DD India, Evian.
And at the outreach session, the Prime Minister also spoke about the West Asia crisis, welcoming the progress made in the peace efforts. Prime Minister Modi said that this conflict has caused loss of life and property for our friendly countries in West Asia. Making a strong case, the disruption of maritime trade in the Strait of Hormuz has harmed the global economy, Prime Minister added. He also said that many Indian civilians have lost their lives. The safety of seafarers who connect all countries through global maritime trade is our responsibility. We must ensure that sea lanes remain safe and seafarers can carry out their work without fear. Okay, we have with us Alok Bansalji, Director, India Foundation. We will be also joined in a while from now, Ambassador Raj Shekhar. But let me quickly welcome Alok Bansal to this broadcast. Thank you very much. Namaste, welcome. It is a pleasure as always talking to you. Your opening remarks, taking a cue from the statements made by Honorable Prime Minister yesterday. And today, of course, his attendance at the outreach session is being viewed as highly consequential. What do you think, in your mind, India puts forth on the high table of G7 in this edition, considering India's regular engagement, Prime Minister's 7th consecutive attendance, and India's 13th consecutive, as an invitee in the G7 rubric. Over to you. So could you please unmute your laptop? Yes.
This is the 7th consecutive participation by Prime Minister Modi in G7 summit, which is a very, very significant factor, because this shows that the G7 countries realize that India is a very, very important key factor, which has a major role to play on the global arena. So firstly, as far as India's significance and importance is concerned, there is no doubt about it. India has arrived on the stage, and that's why it has been called consecutively by 7 times. Now, India's presence at this important junction, Prime Minister has put across a lot of issues. I think one of them which immediately threatens us is at this point of time is the Strait of Hormuz, where he actually highlighted that the seafarers connect the global world, and they should not be harmed, they should not be attacked in military conflict, because we have suffered, I think, we suffered the loss of certain Indian citizens who were attacked by powers in this particular conflict. So that's been stopped. Now he is going to be meeting a lot of leaders. He met yesterday the Canadian Prime Minister. He'll be meeting the EU people. He'll be meeting the German Chancellor. He'll be meeting the US President. And to my mind, India-EU FTA is the most important economic development from India's point of view. It's far greater than India-US trade deal, to my mind. And I think that is very important. And I think that is where I think we are pushing. And that requires ratification by each individual country besides the EU Parliament. And that's where I think Prime Minister's interactions with all these leaders bilaterally will matter. His bonhomie, his relationship with all these leaders is important. He'll also, of course, be talking to Trump after a significant period of time, one-to-one. And this comes at a time when India-US relations are not really in the best of their state. There has been a lot of trust deficit between India and US. And a lot of Indians have concerns about US actions in the past, unilateral tariffs, attacking Indian seamen at sea. All these issues have affected India-US relations, and I am sure this bilateral relationship, this one-to-one interaction would be able to tide over some of this trust deficit. May not be able to completely eliminate it, but I'm sure the way forward as far as trade deal and other issues are concerned will be seen in these bilateral relations.
To sum it up, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just wanted to say that India's presence in this G7 summit shows that India has not only arrived, it has now established itself at the global high table, and it is an integral part of the global high table. Everybody, starting from G7 to SCO or BRICS, all want India to be there in that high table.
Okay, India at the global high table, and the voice that could be consequential when it comes to combating the current challenges. And you would agree, Ambassador Rajashekhar, taking this discussion a little beyond India's... Yeah, namaste, sir. Welcome. Having said that, you would agree that this G7 is taking place amidst tremendous tension wires. You have Russia-Ukraine discussion, then you have Iran-US trust deficit, and then you have India there representing a very balanced, self-assured, trusted voice. Ambassador Rajashekhar, you being a former envoy, if you could just explain, first of all, to our viewers, what's the kind of format that is being followed today? What will really happen when these outreach partners and other stakeholders like multilateral organizations plus the G7 membership come together? They're going to represent, it's going to be a collective representation of all the major concerns that the world is grappling, as we speak this time. My question to you has two parts. Taking a cue from what Alok ji said, India has certainly arrived at the global high table. Yesterday, Prime Minister spoke on varied issues. Today, what is expected? What's the format going to be like? And we take the discussion. The next question will, of course, be about the other issues that would come up. But first up, India at G7.
India continues to be invited to successive G7 summits. although India is not a member of G7, speaks, as Alokji has mentioned, that India's voice has to be heard. Not only that, India today is taking greater interest in conveying the voice of the global south. So, and also India being the most populous country and rapidly developing at the rate of 7% plus, increasing stature on the international stage. All these prompt India to be invited. Not only that, say texts are important. You will see text of the G7 summit communique and text of bilateral meeting, press release and all. That's one element, but simultaneously the context, as you have alluded to, is equally significant. That the backdrop for this G7 summit is one is the West Asia, Iran, Israel, US conflict, and the all-round effort from all directions, from every peace-loving country, to see the end of the conflict so that trade and goods flow as before. We are very close to that. That is one backdrop. Second thing is that undeniably we are sandwiched. World is sandwiched between two predatory hegemons, one China and on another side US, denying the fact. So how the world copes and survives is the central question on the minds of all the global leaders. So we may call this the G7 summit of transcendental diplomacy, that how do we transcend beyond the two major powers of US and China, how we survive. If you see the structure, so the agenda, the working groups, there are working groups on AI, artificial intelligence, and inclusive growth, global solidarity. Our Prime Minister rightly highlighted that there is no shortage of resources in the world as we seek to provide food, fuel, and fertilizer. What is their shortage is the of trust. And our Prime Minister has highlighted that India is concerned that because of this lack of trust, the effect which is suffered by majority of the people, especially in the global south, of supply chains of food, fuel, and fertilizer. And he has called to end the conflict, to resume diplomacy and dialogue so that there is peace and stability, to resume trade, investment, goods flows. So this is the backdrop. And the second point I would like to mention is that...
Go ahead, sir. Yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So the second point is the visuals. Say, if you see how our Prime Minister is welcomed very warmly by the host G7 host French president this time, and he has seated us. Our Prime Minister is seated to the right of President Trump, and in the if you see. Our Prime Minister stands, the family photograph of G7 stands right next to the host French President.
Yes.
These are very useful visuals. And finally, when Prime Minister went to greet President Trump, who is not particularly known for pleasantries, politeness, courtesies, and this etiquette. So even President Trump stood up in the chair and very warmly greeted Prime Minister. So it is undeniable about Indian civilization, Indian government, Indian Prime Minister being very warmly received, and he has been given due. And the G7 is rightly focusing on various issues. The central theme is how to restore the waning, the diminishing trust factor so that the stability and security return will end the conflict.
So the takeaway, if I may put the word in G7 groupings, India's role, Alokji, is indispensable. You cannot discuss global governance without India.
There is no doubt. I think the global community has realized that India is a very, very big factor. Not only are we the largest population, we are also the fastest growing large economy. And especially other countries of G7, that is the Europe and Canada, have realized that India could be a very, very powerful leverage to counter the unilateral threats that have emanated from Washington, D.C. I think it's a democracy. It's a mature democracy. It's a country which has always looked at global good and has adhered to rule-based international order. And as a result, you see the bonhomie that the other leaders are showing towards Indian Prime Minister is far greater than even the US President, who he has known for a longer period of time. And so India's significance on the global arena, I think there is no doubt. And Prime Minister has said very clearly that I think we need to get out of this donor-recipient mindset.
Yes,
and I
yes.
we treat everybody as equals.
Humanity first. Humanity first.
Undoubtedly, the humanity first. And as I said, India, from a developing country, reaching this high table is very, very significant.
So what
and
are
I think
these? Okay, so taking this in a way, what are the leveraging points that India enjoys, Ambassador? India is walking into G7. Enjoying the rare sweet spot. You are simultaneously holding BRICS chair, which by the way includes Russia and Iran both, right? And you are a valued G7 partner. That writing is on the wall. Do you think this gives New Delhi a very unusual edge or a leverage to act as a bridge, to act as a very able moderator, particularly the Ukraine peace conversations and the energy discussions that are going to take place or that have already taken place?
Certainly, the another backdrop that forms is that United Nations is increasingly marginalized and is becoming irrelevant. So that in contrast highlights the significance of platforms like G7 and BRICS. Especially the countries like India, which figure in both places, have disproportionate, if I may say, diplomatic leverage. So there are certain countries which are not in BRICS, but in G7, they have to look to especially the host. This year we are the hosts of BRICS Summit. And similarly, those in BRICS, those who are not in G7, they also value greater because we are there firsthand in those very valuable first-hand discussions and conversations. So that certainly gives us a greater leverage. And India is in a sweet spot and fully leverages these opportunities to advance the national interest. Not only that, also to convey the global South voice and thereby also further improving our stature and global standing.
The sessions
Our Prime Minister has rightly...
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Our Prime Minister has, to buttress your point of, humanity first theme, has rightly recalled, how India has at home also followed inclusive growth, Jan Dhan Yojana and, all digital inclusion. One. Two is externally, whenever there was a crisis anywhere in the world, India has been first responder, whether it is the economic crisis in Sri Lanka or a disaster, earthquake, tsunami, or COVID, or floods in faraway Mozambique or hurricane in Jamaica. We have always taken the view that we're all interconnected and the well-being of one cannot be excluded from the another. This is a very informed view, especially at a time when countries are taking narrow parochial view to use weaponize trade, commerce,
weaponize energy, energy crisis.
Yeah.
Having said that,
this is a soothing, fresh perspective, please.
Yes. Alok ji, taking the cue from that, even paradoxically, you can say that India's role as an able interlocutor on a G7 high table where you have a lot of mistrust among certain nations, and we are one such country. We enjoy that bonhomie, that trust, that trusted partnership between with almost all of them. I don't want to take names here, but I think you're getting what I'm trying to say.
See, there is no doubt. I think ever since the second Trump presidency, the Western world has been in disarray. In fact, the unilateralism which US has exhibited, raising tariffs, unilateral tariffs, devoid of any basis, has created certain uncertainties, a huge trust deficit amongst the G7 countries. And at such a juncture, India emerges as a welcome relief, because we have always stuck, as Ambassador Rajshekhar said, by the dictum that global good is our good. We have not really gone ahead by our narrow parochial gains to stymie what is good for the globe. And the only country with which we had slightly strained relations was Canada. But under the present leadership, that relationship has improved considerably. In fact, Prime Minister said that he'll be visiting Canada end of this year. So it's a very, very significant factor. And I think the EU has rightly realized that they have to get closer to India if they have to have any chance of sustaining this sustained pressure that's emanating from across the Atlantic and continue with their policies of a rule-based international order. And that has further accentuated significance of India in the global arena. And the way India has navigated its policies, its governments in last few years has exhibited to the world that India is here to stay. We have been growing and growing consistently. We have managed major crises, be it COVID or be it to current fuel crisis or the energy crisis because of Hormuz. We have maintained our strategic autonomy and
Correct.
pursued the agenda. So at this point of time, when India is the BRICS chair, our presence at G7 high table actually shows that India is a very, very significant factor as far as the global arena is concerned.
With that, if you could also share your thoughts, how do you see G7 grouping, the current G7 grouping, in terms of wielding power and its role as far as the overall geopolitical architecture is concerned? Because, you know, there are a lot of, the Russia-Ukraine dominated the proceedings. Iran-US is again dominating the proceedings. Energy crisis is dominating the proceedings. So there are very, very pressing issues which are affecting them all.
See, there is no doubt that these G7 countries are economically rich countries, and at one stage they dominated the global economics. And that's why at one stage it became from G7 to G8 when Russia was invited. Of course, Russia was subsequently pushed out. But if you look at the global arena today, the second largest economy is China. India is again, in terms of purchasing power parity, we are the third largest. We may be fifth largest in terms of nominal GDP. So there are now large economies which are outside G7.
So you think G20 could be more robust because it has India and China in it, formally and officially? Huh?
Undoubtedly, G20 is a far more inclusive and far more robust gathering. But again, the problem is getting unanimity within G20 is a difficult process. India achieved it. India achieved it during its presidency, and that was a great, great achievement of India, because G20 not only has China, it has Russia, it has G7 countries as well, and it has some amount of developing countries. And during our presidency, we have now included African Union. So it's a very large grouping, it's a very inclusive grouping, and it represents the world far better than G7, which is actually an elite club to some extent.
Ambassador Rajshekhar, would you like to come in here? We're not really comparing the two, but the context is very important. The timings of this G7 is very, very important. That's why these conversations are taking place, isn't it?
Yes, I began in my first opening remarks also, the context. And French president seems to be also, as the host, thinking on this, inviting India as a permanent guest or, even as a member. And India has always followed the dictum of our foreign policy. Our mission has been to be friends with the world. I will take you back to the first address of Prime Minister to Ambassadors Conference, Indian ambassadors. We call HOM's conference, heads of missions. All the Indian ambassadors from around the world have been invited. That was February 2015. And what Prime Minister said, राजदूतों, दूर से दूर छोटे देश भी ये शिकायत नहीं करना है कि भारत हमें पूछता नहीं है. So what he said is very telling, that the farthest or the tiniest country also should not slip out of our attention that we should be friends, we should work with them, we should hold their hand, collaborate. So this is the exhortation that he has given to our foreign policy. We have exhibited that at the time, this time that value has even further gone up because, say, we are in, the summit is taking place in France. What is the context of European Union? So they are completely battered, bruised by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and the two major powers, US and China, they are predatory hegemons. They're completely sandwiched. So not only European Union, European countries, but also countries like Canada, Japan, of course, developing countries in Africa and Iran and all others, they all need to stick together to listen to the saner, sober voices that humanity first. All of us need to work in a spirit of cooperation, collaboration, not in myopic, parochial nation, my country to the discomfort, disadvantage of others and the world. So this is a very pertinent message that Prime Minister has put across in the G7, and to highlight this, Prime Minister has also undertaken, in between bilateral visit of France and the G7, a visit to Slovakia, where Prime Minister of India has never been. That shows, in terms of metaphor, that howsoever tiny it may be, that India will focus on forging the collaboration, cooperation, working together.
Alokji, can you also comment a bit more as far as the points raised by Prime Minister yesterday is concerned in context of what is expected today? And before that, let us also tell our viewers that as we speak, one of the sessions could be underway that is titled for G7 and partners, as well as the other stakeholders will be participating, Reviving Balanced, Inclusive and Sustainable Economic Growth for the Benefit of All, A, B. And there's one more session lined up later in the day. For the G7 and partner countries, there's a working lunch with the CEOs and all AI companies, artificial intelligence. I think that is also one point we need to discuss. Ensuring the safe, rapid and effective deployment of artificial intelligence. Before that, let's go back to one of those, let's go back to Alokji, and also if you could play out those operative portions of Prime Minister's intervention yesterday at the outreach session, where PM spoke on host of issues, and especially on the issue of seafarers, and when PM also made a strong case of how humanity first and international order is very, very important to India. Alok Bansal, what was the larger point being made yesterday, the bigger signaling by India, the bigger messaging by India?
See, India has actually, yesterday, one of the biggest point was the seafarers issues, allowing seafarers to have, not to be targeted seafarers, because Prime Minister said that it is the seafarers who connect the globe. And having said that, today's meetings on balanced and sustainable growth is going to be very important, because India is probably the only representative in that high table who can be rightfully said to represent the global south. And of course, we have taken giant strides as far as sustainable growth is concerned. Our focus on green energy, our focus on renewable energies has been phenomenal. In fact, the amount of progress India has made in terms of solar energy, wind power, etc. is significant. So I think India can make a relevant intervention. But one of the important facets which this G7 summit would be discussing, which is later in the day, is AI and the social media, how this should be made safe and secure. That's very important, because artificial intelligence has the potential to threaten the mankind, because it has it is a very good innovation. It's got a lot of facilities, but it can also derail the way things have been going on. And that is, I think, the nations need to discuss how they are going to go about it. On other issues, of course, as I said earlier, also it was brought out that rule-based international order as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, freedom of navigation, the two conflicts that have been in US-Iran conflict, because there are apprehensions amongst the global community whether this peace deal, which is going to be signed now, will hold or will not hold, because there are murmurs of dissent in Israel. The conflict between Israel and Lebanon continues. There have been firings going on. And whether Strait of Hormuz can be opened straight away, because there are mines which will need to be cleared, which will require certain period of time. In the interim, the shipping would have to probably perforce follow the route that is given to them by Iranians, because they have mined certain air channels and certain approaches, so they'll have to perforce follow their diktats. So those are issues. And on the Russia-Ukraine war, which is a very important facet as far as the European Union is concerned, I think Zelensky is there meeting Trump, and I think G7 have, as a group, asked for this conflict to end. They are trying to pressurize Russia to come to some sort of a negotiated settlement. And I think this conflict has dragged on for too long.
Yes.
I think the global community as a large would want some end to this conflict. I think at least a ceasefire, if nothing else, is feasible, because there is unnecessary loss of life and property.
Okay, quick one on the AI, because that's also one of the sessions, and India has always advocated, can I go to the guests again, advocated AI for the benefit of all and not weaponizing AI, and PM India has also maintained that AI is not only about innovation, but we don't need to weaponize it. You know, that aspect, and being also the host of the AI summit, the kind of consensus that India sort of built during AI summit, and taking that thought forward today, what to your mind, Ambassador Rajshekhar, what according to your mind would be India's position, India's strong position on AI and not weaponizing artificial intelligence is concerned?
We approach the G7 summit now on the strong credentials and track record of the AI summit earlier this year, where we have forged consensus that we don't need to fragment or allow pursuit of narrow sectarian interests, but AI can benefit as a global good for all. And there shall be some key guidelines which guide the certain key guidelines which shall guide as AI evolves and develops. So we have.
Alok ji, can you take that one up as we fix that audio line?
As I said rightly, I think AI is a powerful tool, and we would want that the global community benefits from AI. But AI should not be weaponized, as we are seeing already. I think there is a huge thing whose AI model should be followed. The American companies, the US has actually prevented some of its AI companies from providing its platforms to outside companies. So there is some sort of weaponization which has already started. And I think that is what PM has been saying, that it should not be weaponized. It should be available for the common good of the humanity, to all the human beings. And I think that's a factor which will be delved onto. You can see the large AI companies, both from US as well as from Europe, are there at the venue. I think because this is going to be a very, very important discussion which is going to take place today.
India walks into Evian holding BRICS presidency, and we managed that consensus when we hosted G20. That's the kind of diplomatic heft that Prime Minister Modi is, representing India there, and not only India, Global South. Ambassador Rajshekhar, a bit on the leveraging points for India.
So firstly, this year we hold the chairmanship presidency of BRICS summit, and some of the countries at G7, they are not present in BRICS. That gives us extra leverage and a desirable presence for us. Two is we have also convened a very successful AI summit earlier this year. And the third thing is we have the credentials of working shoulder to shoulder with Global South, Africa and fellow developing countries in Asia and beyond. So we are a voice of Global South. We are chairman of BRICS, and also we have done considerable work in AI, and similarly in other areas, whether it is energy security, whether it is renewable energy, climate change. He has mentioned that in renewable, solar power, we have exceeded the targets of commissioning 100 gigawatts plus of renewable solar power. So we have the right credentials, and the global leaders will be very listened to as they chart the way forward. And plus, G7 is, Alokji has referred to that, is a shrinking presence. So they had their time under the sun, but they are increasingly shrinking, except US, because of immigration and other openness, they continue to be relevant. But all other members of G7 are shrinking in their economic heft, in their global significance.
Yes.
So in that way also, which is very important.
Yes. There's also this this discussion coming, as in this narrative somewhere, that there could be an expansion of G7. The murmurings here and there, Alokji, you're nodding there, and so is Ambassador Rajshekhar, and this whole ambit of G7, expansion of G7. Yesterday also we discussed with the one Italian journalist, Francesca Marino. She also made a strong case of India's inclusion as far as G7 scheme of things is concerned. Then this talk about D10, the democracy 10, the 10 biggest democracies of the world coming together, and all this and much more. We'll have to really see whether or how significant and consequential this edition of G7 under France's presidency is going to be, not just confined to talk shops, but something more substantial, something more when it comes to the tangible outcomes and the execution of those outcomes. On that note, we'll need to wrap up at least this special broadcast, because but our special coverage from France continues. Let me take this opportunity to thank Alok Bansalji. Always a pleasure having you, and always a pleasure also having Ambassador Rajshekhar. It is such a nice, it's so nice to talk to both of you. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on this broadcast. And before we wrap up this special broadcast, let's also get you some more reportage on the third leg of Europe visit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be leaving for the French capital later today, and what's in store for the Paris on Wednesday and Thursday after the Prime Minister's successful engagements in Nice and Evian. DD India's Gautam Roy is in Paris, and he has filed this exclusive report. Take a look.
Prime Minister Modi is going to be visiting Paris, the French capital, on the third leg of his France visit. Already, as far as Nice is concerned, he's had bilateral engagements with French President Emmanuel Macron, taking India's ties with France forward in multiple strategic fields. He's also put out a strong message of India's ability to innovate at Bharat Innovates in Nice. And again in Evian, he's put forth, while attending the G7 meeting, India's message about how the global south needs to be further integrated and taken along with the developing nations, resolving all the global issues that challenge humankind today. In Paris, he will, of course, be again putting India at the forefront of the global innovation ecosystem while taking part at Viva Tech 2026, which is one of the biggest world's gatherings as far as tech and AI are concerned. Apart from that, he'll also be interacting with the Indian diaspora, which is about 120,000 strong in mainland France and about 350,000 strong if you take the French overseas territories. The message will be very clear that you have to come to India if you want to grow, develop, innovate, and of course take the maximum number of people along, not just the populous India, but also the global south. With camera person Rakesh Kumar, Gautam Roy, Paris, DD India.
And DD India's Gautam spoke to Indian students in Paris about their experience of studying in France and its advantages as compared to other global educational destinations. Let's listen.
With Prime Minister Narendra Modi's latest visit, India and France are looking to widen and expand a whole gamut of ties, including those in education. The goal is to ramp up the number of Indian students from the current 10,000 studying in France to 30,000 by 2030. We have some postgraduate Indian students with us here in Paris. Let's find out from them what has been their experience of studying in France and what do they think about their future prospects. Abhinav, what can you tell us about yourself and what do you make of how things have been so far? You've been here for some time now.
I've been here for the past 9 months and I'm pursuing my master's at Université Paris-Cité at Life Sciences and AI. So France and the experience so far has been it has also been incredible in terms of and stimulating, because the kind of opportunities I was able to get over here, it has been incredible so far. And with the right professors you have, they really push you to areas which are uncomfortable, but that's the push you need in order to excel in your life. You really need a push. and they are giving you the push, but they're also giving you the tools, the accessories to tap into not just only the French market over here, but also the global market, because studying in France, especially at Paris, it offers you an opportunity where you meet a lot of people from different countries.
Actually, what are the other advantages that France might have, studying here compared to other nations?
In France, I would say that it is more cheaper than the other European countries and America and Canada too, because here, like in the public universities, you can have scholarships that the government provides to the Indian students and the international students as well.
The perception is that language is a barrier, and that has been addressed to a certain extent, I believe, in more recent years through the introduction of completely English-taught courses as well, especially in PG. But do you feel that can still be a hindrance, or one can work around it?
So, I'm doing my course in completely English, but I'm a student of astrophysics. It's a research environment. So, when we are in a research group, it's of course a French community, and they are comfortable in speaking in French. For just speaking for like one particular person in English, it's also kind of hard for them. I can understand it. More recently, there are more courses adding on to the English curriculum, like completely in English.
For those who are looking to not alone just study here, but also work here in the years to come, build a future in France, what are the prospects for them?
So they have a 2-year job searching visa over here. So you have the opportunity of being here for 2 more years, working, trying to figure out the area of work where you want to work. But additionally, in France alone, you have the opportunity of doing more internships, or this thing called apprenticeship. It's a 1-year contract between a company and your school. So you'll be like a 1-year paid employee. So this opportunity you won't get in any other European countries.
Okay, thank you guys. So there you have it, very good prospects for those who are looking to do higher learning abroad. France is a destination that is emerging very, very strongly for building a future outside as well, and it's going to be a welcoming destination for Indian students. With camera person Yogesh, Gautam Roy, Paris, DD India.
Well, with that, it's time to wrap up this leg of the broadcast, anchoring a multipolar world order, India G7. But remember, we continue with our rolling coverage and get you the latest news and updates as far as Prime Minister Modi's engagement there in Avion on day 2 is concerned. Two important bilateral scheduled later for the day with President Trump as well as Ursula von der Leyen, Chancellor of Germany. I beg your pardon, bilateral with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. All that and much more on the other side. Stay with us. Namaskar.